This lecture is going to be about design synthesis. So, this part of the process is something that is really underrepresented in terms of how effective it is. It seems simple. It in some ways it is, and in some ways it's not. So what I would encourage you is, even though the how I'm going to tell you to do it is relatively straightforward, you will benefit tremendously just by practicing. Now, the good news I find is that practicing it can actually be quite fun. So one of the things we're going to do is learn to make inferences. I'll give you a little bit of background first. So this is the idea of what we're going to be talking about is something called abductive reasoning. It's different than deductive logic. And so the idea there is that goes from general to specific. So if you say all crows are black, then the general rule, blackness defines a crow, right? And then you can say that, like, okay, if that's true, then if I see a brown bird, because I know all crows are black, then that bird cannot be a crow, right? So that works as long as that the premise, all crows are black, is true. As soon as you get an anomaly, though, that breaks down. But that's deductive logic, right? A way of taking general information and extrapolating a truth from that. Okay. And there's this different idea that was posed by this guy, Charles Sanders Peirce, right? And it's this idea of he was in the kind of 1870s, the school of thought pragmatism, Thomas Dewey, there's other folks. But the idea is he posited that the way that ideas came into being were this idea of logical leaps of mind, right? So I think it's a critical element there, because it's logical, but it is a leap, and that those are two somewhat different things coming together. So it's not just random musings, but it's also not adherently chained to logic, right? So that's one of the ways that he thought about how new ideas came about. One of his contributions was that new ideas came around when thinkers observed data points or data sets that actually didn't conform with existing models. And so one of the ways there's a bunch of studies on this, but the idea of like a black swan is one of the theories around that, about kind of paradigmatic shifts that come about as a result of kind of new information needing to be incorporated into existing models. Then there's Professor Leitka from the Darden School of Business, and she had this idea of abductive reasoning is different than deductive, right? It's different than logic in that it's the reasoning of what might be, right? So it's becoming this creative act. And then Roger Martin from the Rotman School of Business talked about something that it's not necessarily proving that things must be, right? It definitively, the thing I saw means that this is this logical conclusion, and it's, rock hard, solid data. But the idea is it may be, right? And it's positing that as a possibility. And so that's this active inference. As you've done from the reading, John Calco, talks about synthesis and sense making, right? So trying to understand, like, oh, given that I observe these things and I know that this might be true, maybe this other thing is a possibility, right? And that's the idea of, in that sense, the new thing being formed is not necessarily a new product, but a new way of seeing the world, a new model, right? And that's why it's called, sense making, right? And that's developing new knowledge, new ways of seeing the world. So I wanted to share that with you just because that's some of the theory behind this idea of inference. But the actual idea of making inferences is probably something you're actually quite familiar with. And so what we're going to do for the homework is you're going to practice making inferences based on what you heard from your interviews. So this is going to be your logical leap of mind, right? It's logical because you're basing it on something you heard or observed, but it is a leap because you don't have proof that it exists. And here's the format for the homework. This isn't going to be due on Monday, but this is something we'll be talking about a bit in class, and then you'll be doing it for your Wednesday's homework. So you're going to have this format. I met blank, right? You're going to describe briefly the person you met. How would you describe them to someone who's not a college student, right? What are some aspects of their life world that would make sense? And you just want to give enough detail that someone can get a sense of who they are. So then you're going to talk about something that you were surprised to learn, and this will be different than how you see the world. It's something that they told you that was surprising. Oh, interesting. Oh, that's not how I do, or I wonder why they do that. Right? It's something that captures your imagination for some reason. And then, so the first part, right? I met and I was surprised to learn. That's very concrete. You could go back if you videotape your interview. You could be like, oh yeah, they did indeed say that. Right? They were talking about this certain thing. I wonder if this means is where you're getting into the mode of inference, right? And you're saying, huh, I heard this, and I wonder if this means they wouldn't have told you it, but you're wondering, huh, is this a possibility? This is what, again, what Roger Martin says, what may be, right? So this is where I want you to practice wondering if what it means. And again, we'll do some of this in class. And then the final part of the homework will be if I wonder if this means, let's say I'll do an example for my interview. So I met Lindsay, a college senior who really tries to push herself to in every aspect of her life. I was surprised to learn that she actually said there were nice things about being in quarantine. I wonder if this means um, I wonder if this means quarantine actually provides her a reason to slow down. I wonder if this means being in quarantine takes the pressure off. I wonder if this means she temporarily doesn't need to think what she doesn't need to worry about what other people think, right? These are all possibilities of something that I might wonder. And I want you all to do that too, where you're taking you can it's not just doing it once, right? You want to try on a bunch of these to see what feels right. Okay. Okay. And then once you get let's say I wonder if this means being in quarantine is a welcome excuse for her. Then my game changing, this is something it should be different. Like it would be game changing to give her a kind of free pass even when she's not in quarantine, right? So in there, right, what I'm doing is I'm just kind of thinking about flipping the thing that I wonder if it means, the meaning that it has for her, and I'm just flipping it because what I'm hunch or my hunch is that being in quarantine has sort of like diminished some of the pressure she feels normally and actually is helping her to have self-care. That was surprising to me. I would have thought self-care is harder during quarantine. Said something kind of different to me that was surprising, and now I'm wondering if maybe I can bring some of the things that are working during quarantine into her normal life. That's how I'm thinking of it. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. That's what you will be doing for the homework. But the thing I want to just make sure that you think about is really focus on that. Play around with I wonder if this means. And I'm sure all of you do this in your normal lives, right? You've got a friend or like somebody who you know well, and they do something, and you're like what's going on with them? Like, why'd they do that? Like, was that an insult? Are they threatened by me? What's happening? Right? You're kind of you're thinking through different things like, do they like me? Are they like upset with me? What's happening? Right? There's all these ways that in our everyday lives we see something that doesn't quite fit, and then we start to make interpretations about what we think it might mean. That's what you're going to do here. You're just doing it with a stranger and the information they told you. One other note about this, you won't be sharing it back with them, so it's okay and it's actually good if you can take some leaps that they might, hopefully you're coming up with something they might necessarily have thought themselves. That's a good thing. But don't worry, we won't be sharing these back. I'll just be looking.